WNST. Hi, our friends at Cole Roofing. I've got some fresh Kona blend here from Royal Farms in my Cole Roofing mug. They sponsor our Thursday Be More Positive charity and community series. You'll be hearing more about that, as well as our friends at Howard Bank. I got water in my Howard Bank cup because I go water and coffee, and that way I don't get a little too crazy around here. Howard Bank, they have a relentless commitment to being the best at every single thing they do, and now branches everywhere. You can learn more about Howard Bank at howardbank.com, but I'm sure there's one popping up in your community. Also popping up in all of our community right now, Luke Jones, who, of course, covers the Orioles and the Ravens. He'll be scuffling with the Orioles down at Camden Yards as they play out the string, and it's only the first week of May. But meanwhile, the Ravens are in the exact opposite spot where expectation has now shot up. I think interest has shot up, and I think Luke Jones could probably attest to that from over the weekend, where Joe Flacco, by saying nothing, has apparently said everything to the fan base. We are now looking at the next time Joe Flacco speaks as must-view appointment television. Right, Luke?
Well, we've talked about this from the moments that it was possible that the Ravens would draft a quarterback, and specifically Lamar Jackson, and we've certainly talked about it since that moment a couple Thursdays ago, but it certainly makes for a far more intriguing, interesting, unsettling in some ways, off-season, spring, summer. It's going to be really, really interesting in that regard. And we had a chance to see Lamar Jackson and the rookies in Owings Mills over the weekend. And to your point that you just made, Lamar Jackson informing the media, and he was asked this question. He didn't volunteer the information, but was asked the question if he's heard from Joe Flacco yet, and he said no. And I can't say I'm completely surprised by that. I can't say that I think it's the best look for Joe Flacco from a PR standpoint, but he's never been one that's cared about perceptions, let's be totally honest, because how many times have we heard about him needing to throw with receivers in the offseason, and he hasn't done that over the years because it frankly wasn't that big of a deal, at least in his mind or in the mind of at least some fans. But this is certainly going to be an interesting situation, and whenever we hear from Flacco next, whether it's the first batch of OTAs next week or whether it's not until mandatory minicamp next month, it's certainly going to be something that's asked frequently. And just gauging John Harbaugh's press conference on Saturday after rookie minicamp concluded, I'd say a good probably 65 to 75% of the questions related to Lamar Jackson in some way. So the Ravens created this by drafting a quarterback in the first round.
Yeah, the whole thing got set on fire, right? Like when that trade happens at 11, was it about 11:33 in the evening? What?
Yeah, it was somewhere around. Yeah, it was well after 11 o'clock.
Yeah, and that every single conversation we're going to have moving forward is about this kid who was the fifth best quarterback in the draft, according to everyone else, right? So I keep going back to this, well, he's just going to be there, and I know you'll shut me up, and you've been the first one to jump in and say, he's going to do this, he's going to do that, and I'm thinking to myself, I mean, he's going to have to be able to go out there and show a real capacity to know the offense, to be able to play, to be more than slash, right? Which he doesn't want to be, right? And the word on him, and I guess going through all of this, was he's got a peculiar background with his mother and the lack of an agent, and the way that he can run an offense is not the only unique part about him that other teams looked at and said, we don't want him. Again, every single team had a chance to make him their franchise quarterback, and they did not. I don't know that he's the franchise quarterback here yet, or whether he'll ever be. In other places, they have to go play Mahomes this year because that's sort of the way that thing happened. I don't know that has to happen here unless Joe Flacco stinks. And to your point, they could have used that second-round draft pick on something else to get him help. They didn't. That probably hasn't rubbed well with him, bringing in his replacement. Yeah. Probably, as Brian Billick pointed out the morning after, if they would call me and say, hey, Ness, you and Luke are going to do radio together, and then in December, you're going to be out of work. Good luck with that. Go work together. But that's the league, and the fact that Flacco hasn't been challenged, that's just a tribute to how good he's been, how good the team's been. But at some point, that's going to happen for everyone. It happened to Brett Favre, for crying out loud, right?
Yeah, and I hear everything you're saying, but my point is, if you don't envision him being your franchise quarterback and replacing your current quarterback, then why the hell are you taking him in the first round? And that's
because of his potential.
And by the way, everything you just said may prove to be valid. He may not develop into a franchise quarterback, and maybe Joe plays a little bit better this year, and and we're not going to see this, and they're certainly not going to vocalize this. And look, I thought Lamar Jackson on Saturday, when the media had a chance to watch him, he did some good things. He did some not so good things. He looked like a rookie quarterback, and that's not a knock on him whatsoever. That's not an indictment on him, and that's not but I'm also not going to sit there and say I was completely blown away by what I saw. I mean, I watched him play in college. He's a special athlete. He has more passing ability than some people want to give him credit for, considering he was in that Louisville offense that had lots of pro elements to it. So it's not as though this kid hasn't been exposed to some pro elements, but he does have a long way to go. But my thinking on this is I'm going to be unmoved about this. The Ravens did not draft Lamar Jackson without you have to acknowledge they had to be dissatisfied with what they've seen from Joe Flacco. And you don't draft a guy in the first round without the intention of replacing your starters sooner rather than later. And if that isn't the case, then I think this move was even dumber than I thought it was to begin with, so quite frankly. So we'll see. And again, this is going to play out.
You thought this was dumb. I mean, let's go back to that for a minute. I mean, I sort of check off on this, and I sort of get this insurance policy, but I don't know that Lamar Jackson – I mean, we're treating Lamar Jackson like he's Peyton Manning or Andrew Luck as a fan base, and I think – the Andy Benoits who's been here this week, and they're all treating it like that. This is not that organization where everybody's running for cover. This is not the Cleveland Browns where this kid has to be the Messiah. I right here, right now, they've at least bought themselves that, because if they did go 3-13 or 5-11 this year and find themselves drafting 5th, 6th, 7th in the draft to take a quarterback, that person would have to be the Messiah, right? I don't know that Lamar Jackson has to be the Messiah, but to your point, they've created some upheaval in their own building right now that John has never had to manage through, and they've invited this on where we're going to have this conversation for the next 5 months, whether this kid can play or not. And right now, I don't think he can play right now, and 31 other teams thought that too. So until I see him go out and look at him and say this kid can win 11 or 12 games in the league, he is very much an experiment, and I know I'm going to get distracted by it because you're going to get distracted by it, and the fans are going to get distracted by it, and he's going to throw the ball more in July and August than Joe is at that point. But the focus for the team is still on the Buffalo Bills and who gives them the best chance of beating the Buffalo Bills, as well as the Cleveland Browns in Week 17. And right now, that's got to be Joe Flacco, man. So I look at it and say, yeah, but it's creating a lot of noise where, quite frankly, the Orioles aren't going to make any noise. So as a sports radio guy, I'm all for it. But I'm trying to separate what is fiction in the minds of fans and what is the 5th quarterback taken in the draft and a guy that everybody else said, nice athlete, but we're not going to take that on, having a kid run around here and try to rush for 1,000 yards as our quarterback,
Right, and one thing I will disagree, not all 31 teams passed on him because not all 31 teams are looking for quarterbacks, in the same way that the Ravens wouldn't have drafted Andrew Luck 6 years ago because they had a franchise quarterback. But to your point, certainly the 4 teams that drafted a quarterback before him, New England, New Orleans, these teams that whether they had a franchise quarterback or whether they didn't have one or whether they had one that's so old in advance that they should be thinking about the future, you're right. And even look at Pittsburgh, who ended up taking their quote quarterback of the future in the 3rd round. But I what you present, that's what I haven't even. That's my issue with this, because you don't have a roster that's on the verge of winning the Super Bowl. So how are you telling me that you're in win now mode and you just wasted a potentially really valuable draft pick on another quarterback? That goes back to my point, but we'll talk about this over and over. We may be talking about this 5 years from now, and that might be by the time Joe Flacco's gone and Lamar Jackson is gone by then. I don't know. And I'm guessing some other individuals making decisions in this organization could be gone if that scenario plays out.
Well, we'd say one of them has to be able to play, but,
Sure.
there's 52 other guys on the team. I mean, that's been the issue with Flacco, that you
Sure.
can hate Joe Flacco the last 3 years, but you can also look and say, what is Brashad Perryman? Where is Jeremy Maclin?
Yeah.
Where are these offensive linemen
Yeah.
that year after year they're getting $10, $12 million in other places, and then we're going and replacing them with a fifth-round draft pick and saying, let's go play with that. We haven't drafted a running back around. Let's go play with that. The tight ends, they're hurt or they're 37 years old, or their wide receivers are 37 years old, and those are the guys we're going and getting. So, I'm not up on Flacco or down on Flacco. I know one thing he's got that Lamar Jackson might never have, which is a ring. And that's really what it's about. And, they'll try to keep taking that ring away from Flacco, until such point where, he's out of the league. But he's still the quarterback here, and I find it very hard to cut through the noise of watching this kid with legs run around out there and being wowed by that in sweatpants versus a guy who's done it in the league for 11 years, and won a championship.
Yeah, but it's also, what have you done for me lately? And that was 5 years ago. And they haven't made the playoffs more than one time over the last 5 years. So, look, Joe Flacco should be on notice, just like a lot of other people in this organization should be on notice. And that was kind of my point, and I'll continue to say. I think, one, you made an interesting point as far as there being so much buzz about this, and I do think there is a certain amount of PR, marketing, buzz, benefit to doing this that I think was at least something that was mentioned in the room. I don't think that drove the decision entirely, but this has been a boring team to watch the last 5 years. Let's not mince words. How many times have you and I talked after games and said, well, it was a win, but they didn't look so good? Or how many times have we been sitting there saying, I'm bored out of my mind watching this right now? So there is a certain element to that. And I don't believe for a second that wasn't at least something that was brought up in conversation by someone at some point over the last 6 weeks or so when they evaluated this kid and watched him on tape and brought him in for a top 30 visit. I think that absolutely was part of it. But you can talk all you want about preseason hype and interest in your preseason games and people paying more attention to what happens at rookie camp and OTAs. There needs to be substance there in the end, and that's the big question that you presented that we won't know for quite some time. But in the meantime, you have Joe Flacco as your quarterback. You have Lamar Jackson as at least the potential quarterback of the future, regardless of your feeling on that. Again, you don't take a quarterback with the thought that he's not going to be your quarterback at some point here in the future. And my biggest question continues to be, how do you get from point A to point B there? They say they want to win and be competitive now. And they've used their second-round pick this year and their second-round pick next year to move up to take Jackson. They get the fifth-year option. That's great, but how is he developing in the meantime? He's not playing behind a quarterback that's similar to him whatsoever in terms of skill set. So we've talked about the lack of practice reps you get in this day and age. We've talked about if he's even going to be the backup. Is he running the scout team? Is he getting any first team reps at all? Because it is limited practice time compared to 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago. It's great to say he's just going to sit and develop, but how is that happening? And you mentioned the slash element. I think it's going to be readily apparent that this team wants to utilize his athleticism. Now, I don't think that means he's going to line up as a wide receiver. I think that means you're going to see him going in motion, using some option type situations, handing the ball off to him and having him throw. I think you're going to see that. I really do think you're going to see that. Regardless,
I think you're going to have to see that, and even though Joe's not going to like it, right?
Right, and that is part of the element. If you remember, famously 5 years ago, Joe Flacco called the Wildcat stuff that they were doing with Tyrod Taylor a quote high school offense. Joe hasn't played well enough the last couple of years to be making that kind of a proclamation anymore. So that's one thing where I will call him out a little bit.
Yeah, you don't like the trick plays. Make the regular plays work.
Right. And look, we've all said it. Yes, I've been one of the many that have banged the table saying you need to get this guy more talent around him. At the same time, he has to own his part of this too. And we've all said he needs to play better, on top of them, the organization doing a better job around him. But Jackson's going to be involved in some way, and I think you almost have to do that. One, he's a phenomenal athlete. Two, you got to get this kid some reps somehow. And, I mean, let's face it, even in the ideal scenario, for Jackson's purposes, that he becomes the guy next year and he's ready to go, this is never going to be a kid that's going to drop back in the pocket and throw 45 times. That's just not who he's going to be. That's not his biggest strength. He's going to be the guy that is some kind of a hybrid of Michael Vick, and you hope he has more Russell Wilson in him from a standpoint of Russell Wilson really is not a running quarterback whatsoever. You watch him play, he's a pocket passer, but he has that special ability to be able to extend plays with his legs and make plays when necessary.
Well, that's a patience in seeing the field, and then that literal split-second decision, do I throw it or do I run it? In every case in the history of football, that guy tends to run it a little too much for any coach's liking and tends to get out on his horse on instinct alone, quicker than anyone in the NFL is comfortable with. Anyone, even the guy that has Michael Vick's uncomfortable with, well, maybe you should have thrown it there instead of running there. And then you have that old Billick thing, which is, go down, no, stay up. Oh, and then next thing you know, somebody misses a tackle because you juke, and it's an 80-yard touchdown pass. And Joe Flacco, lined up as a wide receiver, will say, well, we got a lead now. We didn't have a minute ago, so maybe that's not such a bad thing. There's part of the buy into that part of Joe with the high school offense thing is, well, can it be successful? Can it help us win games? If it can help us win games, I would think Joe could buy in on elements of that, because Joe likes having special athletes. Joe likes having another weapon in the offense, if that's what this is. And Joe also understands his job's not forever. I get that. I just think the fans have seen this one way, and I think Joe clearly over the last 10 days, 12 days has not, I don't want to say handled this well, but hasn't handled it well for his own PR, but I don't think he cares about that.
Yeah, he's never cared about that perception. If he did, he would have been throwing with receivers in the offseason the last 6-7 years. How many times has that been a narrative that, frankly, I don't think really matters all that much? It's something that can help you. It can garner some favor with fans and even with your own organization. But and I said this, when Joe declined the interview at the draft party last Saturday, that was a non-issue for me. As long as he was nice to fans and signing autographs and did his Q&A with the kids, I didn't need to hear from him as a media guy. I want to hear from him because I'm a media guy, but I get that.
It's easy to say about Joe. Just say the right thing. Hey, I look forward to meeting this young kid. I watched him play. That would have been very, very easy to do, and Joe didn't do that. And Joe's a really smart guy, and I don't know whether he'll have regrets about that one day, because he's opened up more than he needed to open up. This isn't good for him. If I were advising him, if I had seen him there, I would have said, dude, why just give the 90 seconds of, hey, I was watching, I was shocked, I like competition, he seems like a good young man, I've had other quarterbacks, this will be fine. That would have been very easy for him to do, and I guess it wasn't in him to do it last Saturday, right?
Sure. And I guess, to piggyback on that, Lamar Jackson was asked about it on Saturday, and you knew he would be. If Flacco had contacted him. We know Joe's in the building. Over the course of this past week, he was in the building because he was working out, because he's there for off-season training program. It would have been very easy for Joe to just say to Marty or whoever, hey, give me the kid's cell phone number. Let me send him a text just to say what's up. I'll see you in a couple weeks for OTAs. Congratulations. And then Lamar Jackson would have relayed that to everyone on Saturday, and that would have helped Joe. So, but this goes back to what I said. Joe has never been someone who cares about perceptions. Do I think it's the best look for him? Probably not. Do I really think it matters in the end? No, not really. And that's why I didn't make a big deal about it and write a big piece at WNST.net about it. It was one line in my notebook from Saturday. So, but that said, and I'm sure at some point in time, and I was even kind of waiting for it on Saturday. I mentioned Harbaugh and I can't remember how many questions he was asked, maybe 12 or 13. Probably 7 or 8 of those were in some way related to Lamar Jackson. I was kind of waiting for not John to explode, but John to kind of bark back and say, hey, there are other guys on this football team, and Lamar Jackson's a talented rookie, but he is just a rookie, and let's chill on this. He didn't do it, to his credit, but at some point in time that's going to be coming, because every time a national reporter comes through Owings Mills now, they're not going to be asking about who's playing left tackle or who's the linebacker or anything. They're not going to be asking about that. They're going to be asking about what? Lamar Jackson and Joe Flacco. And at some point this organization's going to get a little weary about that, but it goes back to what we said at the outset. They chose this. No one in the media told them to take a quarterback, so you better be ready to handle it. So we'll see how this plays out. I'm guessing it's not going to be all harmonious, but I also don't expect it to be a disaster either. But if they're 1-2 and playing week 4, and Flacco's going, or the offense, I should say, is going 3 and out and struggling to score.
Well, that was the Andy Benoit piece, which I'm sure you read, out at the MMQB, which is, they're going to play the Tennessee Titans on my 50th birthday. We have a trip down there. Obviously, we're going to the Jack Daniels, brewery or distillery on Monday. Right. That if you wake up that day and the Ravens have lost 13-9, and Flacco's got 154 yards of passing on 13 of 31, and somehow the team's at 500 and they're 3-3. What do you do? And that would be the question for everyone. I want to go back to Purple Rain 2 here in my chapter with Bisciotti and Flacco about what Bisciotti said about Flacco back then, when Flacco literally turned down a contract that 99% of other quarterbacks would have said, yeah, give me the guaranteed money right here, right now. That's a fine deal. You're paying me like a top 5 NFL quarterback. Flacco said, no, I want to be number 1. And Bisciotti didn't understand it, and he said, I figured if he's fine with it, then I should be fine with it. I wanted it behind both of us. I guess I didn't really understand how different a guy he was. I told him, you're a different cat, man. That's what Bisciotti said to Flacco. So when you're wondering why he's not texting Lamar Jackson or why he is the way he is, and he's my all-time favorite athlete, I will never step back from that. Through all of this, and that's why in my cautious optimism of getting the Caps into the Eastern Conference Finals, I'm cautiously optimistic on some sort of a bounce back from Joe Flacco that isn't. Now, if his back is bad, right, if his back's broken, I will, and they know something I don't know, that there's some herniated or something that says, Joe, you're going to play to your 36 or 30. You're not going to be Tom Brady because your body is not built that way, and you're not that. Okay, I'll hear that, but I would also hear Joe Flacco giving the Philadelphia middle finger to everybody and saying, you doubting me? Really? You're doubting me? You doubted me to begin with? You tried to lowball me on a contract because you didn't think I was going to win the Super Bowl and you had to pay me more? Nobody liked me in Delaware. Nobody liked me in Pittsburgh. All of that. I was a backup to Tyler Powell. All of that goes into who Joe is at this point, as well as 5 kids and a wife and a bunch of money and all of that stuff. But I think Joe comes back into this thing differently because I don't see Joe's personality to be that Elvis Gerback. Well, I got $100 million now. It doesn't matter anymore. I'll just go off into the sunset and play golf. I don't think, based on the pissiness of this with Joe toward Lamar Jackson, I think that they've accomplished what they wanted to accomplish. I had an insider the night of the draft say to me, this will be good for Joe. It'll burr him up. It'll make him play better. Well, then go get it. So there's a little bit of that might be going on because, as Bisciotti said, Joe's a different cat, right?
Yeah, and to that part of this strategy, I would still go back and say, well, how about doing a better job putting players around them the last 5 years? That might be a better motivator than drafting a replacement. But no, I think there's absolutely a validity to that potential. I think you look at what they've done, at least attempted to do at wide receiver and tight end this offseason. Look, I'm not. So many people have spoken in absolutes that they're definitely better at wide receiver. We'll see. We're talking about 3 guys that are coming back from bounce back, disappointing seasons, guys that need to rebound. I've said all along, I do like the fact that they do different things. I like the fact that Hayden Hurst and Mark Andrews are different types of tight ends. I even liked what I saw from Jordan Lastly running around this weekend, the fifth-round wide receiver from UCLA, who put up some big numbers despite some inconsistent hands and some off-field type concerns that aren't major things, but certainly question about, make his maturity come into question. So it's not as though they haven't changed things up. I'm not guaranteed. I don't look at that group and say, wow, that's a top 10 wide receiver group or a top 10 tight end group, but there's at least something different there and not just going down the same road that they've gone down these previous years where it's, you go out and get a bargain basement receiver signing and, you take a sixth-round wide receiver and you're still selling the hope of Rashad Perriman. So they've at least acted in aggressive fashion, as aggressive as they could have been or should have been. I don't know. I'll leave that up to the individual. But you hope with those things in place, and let's be clear, not all of these moves are going to work out, and that's the way drafts always are. That's the way free agency always is. But you hope with the number of additions that they've made that Flacco does have a better chance of being successful. And he's got to look at it like this, whether it's next year and staying with the Ravens or it's potentially being traded in a way that, like the Redskins traded for Alex Smith and Kansas City jettisoned him and turned the job over to Patrick Mahomes, and we'll see how that works out, first of all. I've heard a lot of people cite that strategy. We don't know if that strategy is going to work out for the Chiefs. So I've never thought that as being a good blueprint to justify what the Ravens did in drafting Lamar Jackson. But Flacco's going to be playing for a job next year, whether it's staying in Baltimore or whether it's elsewhere. And I'm guessing Joe doesn't fancy himself as someone who is nearing the end of his career, so he's got a lot to prove. He's got a lot to prove to this organization, and he's got a lot to prove to the rest of the league. And to your point, in the past when he's been in that position, and you go back to 2012, acknowledging that was a long time ago, but if he's healthy and he has a better supporting cast around him this year, and there's at least a potential for that, I think you like his chances to bounce back and be better. Does that translate to the best season of his career? I would be surprised by that, but can he get back to where he was in, say, 2014, which was arguably, one of his finest regular seasons? Yeah, I think that's possible. But again, a lot of that goes back to how do these guys fare at wide receiver? How do these rookie tight ends acclimate themselves to the NFL? How does Orlando Brown potentially do in competing with James Hurst for the right tackle job? Who's going to be the center? So I keep coming back to everyone wants to point to Flacco. And again, I will continue to say drafting Lamar Jackson still feels to me, this screams making Joe Flacco the scapegoat for organization-wide failures on the offensive side of the ball. But what's done is done. What exactly happens here as far as Flacco, his ability to bounce back, his ability to play at a level where the Ravens are more content in letting Jackson sit another year, or in a position where if they think Jackson's ready and they really like what they see, then maybe there is a possibility of pulling off what Kansas City did with Alex Smith next year. So regardless of how it all turns out, it's going to be very, very interesting, and it's going to be plenty of discussion, plenty of fodder for months and months ahead.
Plenty for us to discuss around here. Luke Jones is at Baltimore Luke on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net, out on everywhere we are, quite frankly. Camden Yards all week long, as well as the Ravens. All of our WNST programming brought to you by the Baltimore Brigade. They got a bye week this week. They go down to D.C. next weekend on Preakness Day. Back at home on Friday, May 25th. Write that down on your calendar. Maybe Cap probably still playing then, too. Let's hope. That'll be Friday the 25th down at the Royal Farms Arena against the Philadelphia Soul. You can learn more by downloading that Monumental Sports app and at BaltimoreBrigade.com. Don't forget our friends at the Modell Lyric. Captain Kirk coming in. William Shatner's going to be here doing a Star Trek turn next week. You can learn about that at Modell-Lyric.com, as well as those concerts coming up in the fall with Steely Dan in October, as well as Kansas in November. I enjoyed the heck out of Jackson Browne last Thursday night, even though I missed the first half of it watching the Caps do their business against the Pittsburgh Penguins. Last but not least, Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast, always there for you. Make sure you're downloading that ROFO app and you're using that to get your Kona Blend coffee, get your dark Brazilian roast, to pick up your fried chicken or your Western fries. You get points. You'll get those snacks for free if you're using it when you're pumping your gas at Royal Farms. We all get our gas at Royal Farms as well. Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. Luke, last thing for you. It's not just Lamar Jackson out there. Again, Hayden Hurst is the lost guy, and Andrews and all the rest of these guys. You had a chance to go out there. We've heard a lot of them. It's all up in the BioToyota.com audio vault as well. Any impressions from the first week out there? It is a different kind of draft class for the sheer volume, the quarterback, the expectation, getting, the amount of afterglow on the draft where people know these guys' names now. This is sort of a throwback draft almost to back into the 90s where I think all of these players come in because there's so many names and so many bodies that this will be a big discussion point above and beyond Lamar Jackson and Joe Flacco, I think.
Well, it needs to be because you need to build an offense. And to what I tweeted moments after they drafted Lamar Jackson, I said, I hope the Ravens do a better job building an offense around him than they did for Joe Flacco after the Super Bowl. And that holds true with whether you're pro-Lamar Jackson taking over as soon as possible or whether you're pro-Joe Flacco holding on to the job for a few more years and making Lamar Jackson wait, or maybe turning it into a Jimmy Garoppolo scenario even, to that extreme degree. You need these other guys to be able to play. You need Hayden Hurst to be a first-round tight end. Does that mean he needs to be a Pro Bowler? Not necessarily, but you'd like him to be the steadiest, most well-rounded tight end that they've had since Todd Heap, probably. When you consider Pitta was not much of a blocker. Mark Andrews, you're hoping he can fill that Dennis Pitta kind of role where you're a move tight end and going in motion and lining up in the slot, and you're hoping he can develop a little bit as a blocker, which he's not considered to be a blocker at all. Orlando Brown Jr., who I love the sentimental aspect of the story, but I still go back to his combine numbers and say that was the most important job interview of your career. And you completely flubbed it. So is it just that you're not a very good athlete, or did you not care enough to be ready and prepared for that? And I think that's a real question. As much as we all want to see Baby Zeus work out, that's a real question that he's going to have to answer. And I'm guessing it will become pretty apparent to this coaching staff sooner rather than later what his work ethic is like and all of those different questions. So, we'll see. Certainly they need... Not all 12 draft picks are going to work out. In fact, 7 or 8. You're not going to have as many as 7 or 8 work out. You're hoping out of this group you can get 2 or 3 starters. That would be great. And you're hoping you can get a couple more reliable, solid, useful backups. And if that's the case, then this will be a really successful final draft class for Ozzie Newsome. But so much of it is going to hinge on what happens with Lamar Jackson. That's ultimately going to define this. In the same way that the 2003 draft, you can talk all you want about Terrell Suggs, Brian Billick will always look back and remember what? Kyle Bowler. So time will tell, but regardless of who's lining up under center for the Ravens in Week 12, in 2019, in 2020, 2021, you want some of these other individuals that they drafted to make an impact. And I will say, I liked what I saw from Hayden Hurst and Andrews over the weekend. Orlando Brown, up and down. I think, and it's rookie camp, so I want to provide that caveat to anything I say. This was a very inconsequential rookie mini camp that I'm not sure how much it's really telling you, but the early return on their early draft picks, I think mostly positive. And to a point I made a few minutes ago, another guy as far as day 3 pick that stood out to me, I thought Jordan Lastly looked pretty good. So who knows? Maybe Ozzie Newsome in his final draft finally finds that late round wide receiver that the Ravens are actually able to develop. But Before that happens, we have a lot to learn about all of these guys before we make any determinations like that.
All right, you can hear from all of them up in the Toyota.com audio vault. Poor Luke will be subjected to Oriole baseball here all week as the Ravens continue to work out and get themselves together out in Owings Mills. All of our work can be found out at WNST.net and in the Toyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. Find him, Luke, at WNST.net. Find me, Nasty, at WNST.net. And find us as well when breaking news happens first on the WNST text service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis is working on Friday this week here from 3 until 5, not Thursday. So catch the SSV on WNST Friday from 3 until 5. I am Nestor. He is Luke. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST, Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.